Before Jackie Chan became a household name, before Hollywood ever cared about kung fu, there was Sammo Hung, a man who flipped, fought, and laughed his way through every stereotype the industry threw at him. His journey began in bloodied training halls and ended in global influence. But behind the action was a deeper story of sacrifice, betrayal, and a relentless fight to be seen. This is not just about martial arts, it's about legacy. And once you hear what really happened behind the camera, you'll never see Sammo the same way again. Subscribe to Criminal Tracks for more stories they never wanted you to know. Before the world knew his name, before he became a cinematic legend, Sammo Kam Bo Hung was just a young boy with boundless energy and a body that didn't fit the mold. Born in 1952 in British-ruled Hong Kong, Sammo wasn't handed anything. He didn't have a wealthy family or industry connections that paved his way. What he had was grit and a childhood steeped in bruises, sweat, and discipline that bordered on brutality. At the tender age of 9, his grandparents enrolled him in the China Drama Academy, a strict Peking opera school run by the infamous Master Yu Jim Yuan. There, young Sammo would share the stage and the pain with other soon-to-be legends like Jackie Chan and Yuan Biao. Their days began before dawn and ended long after dark, filled with punishing acrobatics, martial arts drills, and stage performances. Meals were earned, not given. Mistakes were met with the crack of a cane. And yet, within that chaos, Sammo thrived. Unlike the slender, wiry builds of his peers, Sammo stood out. Larger, heavier, but every bit as agile and determined. He turned what many would consider a disadvantage into his trademark. Even in those early years, his comedic timing, his lightning-fast reflexes, and his ability to move like a dancer despite his bulk made him unforgettable. His peers called him Big Brother, not just because of his age, but because of his leadership and presence. And when the troupe disbanded and the students scattered, Sammo became the first among them to leap into the film industry. By the late 1960s, Sammo was already making waves as a stuntman and extra. His big break came not in front of the camera, but behind it. He began choreographing fight scenes, injecting a new level of realism, rhythm, and innovation that Hong Kong cinema hadn't seen before. He brought his Peking opera roots into the film world. Fights became performances, with rhythm and tempo like dance numbers. Directors noticed. Soon, Sammo was the man behind the action in some of Golden Harvest's biggest films. He choreographed the brutal combat in The Angry River, The Iron-Fisted Monk, and eventually Enter the Dragon, Bruce Lee's final film. Though his screen time was brief in that global hit, his influence was embedded in every punch. Still, Sammo didn't want to remain in the shadows. In 1977, he wrote, directed, and starred in Enter the Fat Dragon, a kung fu comedy that didn't just parody Bruce Lee. It declared that action heroes didn't have to be chiseled or stoic. They could be funny. They could be flawed. They could look like Sammo Hung. That film wasn't just a commercial success. It shattered stereotypes and opened the floodgates for a whole new era of martial arts cinema. The 1980s were Sammo's golden years. With his production company, Boho Films, he created some of the most inventive and beloved kung fu films in history. The Prodigal Son was a masterclass in Wing Chun technique and storytelling. Winners and Sinners, My Lucky Stars, and Eastern Condors blended slapstick, drama, and jaw-dropping action in ways that thrilled audiences and critics alike. He was directing, producing, choreographing, and starring, all while pushing the limits of what his body could do. He launched collaborations with Jackie Chan and Yuan Biao, forming the so-called Three Dragons. Together, they brought a unique chemistry to the screen. Sammo's grounded power, Jackie's comedic fluidity, and Yuan's acrobatic precision. Their films weren't just hits, they were events. Behind the scenes, Sammo was also a mentor. He spotted talent early and nurtured it relentlessly. He believed in Michelle Yeoh before the world did. He trained Donnie Yen when few took him seriously. If a performer had drive, Sammo gave them opportunity. But he didn't coddle. He demanded excellence. His sets were notoriously intense. Every movement, every camera angle had to be perfect. Perfection wasn't an option. It was an obligation. As the 1980s progressed, Sammo became one of the most respected figures in the industry. He wasn't just a martial arts star. He was a visionary. His ability to combine physicality with character, to mix humor with danger, and to tell stories that transcended language made him a cinematic force. He made martial arts films for Hong Kong, but they resonated far beyond its borders. He gave audiences something they hadn't seen before, the action star as an everyman, not a stoic warrior or a pretty boy, but a flawed, flesh and blood fighter who could make you laugh 1 minute and drop your jaw the next. And he did it all while defying gravity and expectations. He was heavy-set in an industry obsessed with slim, chiseled bodies. He was older than many of his peers, but outpaced them in choreography and execution. He wasn't always the leading man by conventional standards, but he made himself indispensable. Sammo wasn't just surviving the film industry, he was redefining it. By the time the 1990s rolled around, Sammo had become a cornerstone of Hong Kong cinema. He was now a household name, not just in Asia, but in international film circles. His work ethic, his humility, and his refusal to let any obstacle, be it physical, cultural, or professional, stand in his way made him not just a legend, but a symbol of transformation, of grit, of breaking the mold. Because if Sammo Hung could become a kung fu star, despite his weight, despite the stereotypes, despite every limitation, then maybe anyone could. But just as the heights of fame bring light, they also cast long shadows. The next chapter of Sammo's story would be one of challenges, misunderstandings, and the painful reality of staying relevant in an industry that moves faster than even the greatest martial artist. And for Sammo, the battle was far from over. The 1990s brought a shift that no one in the Hong Kong film industry could ignore. The golden era of kung fu cinema was beginning to fade, replaced by changing tastes, Hollywood imports, and a growing appetite for slick, Western-style action. For Sammo Hung, who had spent decades redefining martial arts films with raw physicality and inventive choreography, this transition wasn't just a challenge, it was a storm. Behind the scenes, things were getting more complicated. His relationship with Jackie Chan, once warm and brotherly, grew distant. Though there was never a public feud, rumors of creative differences and diverging priorities swirled in industry circles. Jackie was pushing toward global superstardom, refining his image for a wider audience. Sammo, on the other hand, remained grounded in the gritty, local storytelling that made him a legend. They appeared together less frequently, and their paths seemed to fork not with anger, but inevitability. During this period, Sammo also began facing the physical consequences of a lifetime spent defying gravity. His weight, which had once been part of his screen persona and charm, became a health concern. Years of punishing stunts on hard concrete and narrow platforms had left his body battered. His knees were deteriorating, his stamina was fading, but Sammo didn't slow down. He pushed harder, directed more, acted more, and that unrelenting pace came with a price. Financial pressures began to mount. His production company, Boho Films, had once been a powerhouse, churning out hit after hit. But the industry was changing. Audiences were becoming harder to please, budgets were tightening, and box office success was no longer guaranteed. Several of Sammo's projects failed to recoup their investments. And unlike some of his contemporaries, who diversified into endorsements or business ventures, Sammo was all in, heart and soul, on filmmaking. He wasn't a businessman. He was a creator, and creators are vulnerable when the market turns cold. Still, Sammo was not one to back down. In the late 1990s, he took on one of his most surprising roles, not in a kung fu epic, but in a CBS primetime drama in the United States. Martial Law, which premiered in 1998, cast Sammo as a Chinese cop, transplanted to Los Angeles, solving crimes with a mix of brains, brawn, and culture clash humor. For many American viewers, it was their first introduction to Sammo Hung. The show was a moderate success, praised for its action sequences and Sammo's charisma. But behind the scenes, it was far from smooth. Working in Hollywood was a different beast. There were union rules, strict production schedules, and creative limitations that Sammo had never experienced in Hong Kong. In interviews, he later admitted feeling constrained, unable to direct the action his way, unable to shoot the scenes with the freedom he was used to. Cultural misunderstandings, language barriers, and creative frustrations piled up. After 2 seasons, Martial Law ended. Though Sammo had broken ground as one of the first Asian leads on American television, the experience left him disillusioned. He returned to Asia, older, wiser, and slightly worn out. Back home, the industry had moved on. Younger stars were emerging. Computer-generated effects were replacing practical stunts. And audiences, once loyal to Sammo's brand of action comedy, now gravitated toward newer, flashier productions. Sammo wasn't out of the game, but he was no longer at the center of it. Roles became fewer, budgets became tighter, and his name, once printed in bold at the top of every poster, was starting to fade into the background. The stress took a toll on his personal life as well. His first marriage to Jo Yanoke had already ended in divorce. The demands of his career, long hours on set, constant travel, and an obsessive commitment to perfection had left little room for balance. He later acknowledged that he hadn't always prioritized his family, and that regret lingered like an old injury. Still, Sammo found stability again with his second wife, Joyce Godenzii, a former beauty queen and actress who had starred alongside him in Eastern Condors. Their bond helped anchor him through some of his darkest times. As the 2000s unfolded, Sammo's temper occasionally made headlines. Known for his strict discipline on set, he clashed with younger actors who he felt lacked dedication or respect for the craft. Some described him as harsh, even intimidating, but others saw a man fiercely protective of an art form he believed was dying. He wasn't yelling for the sake of ego. He was fighting for standards, for authenticity, for the soul of martial arts cinema. And just when it seemed like the industry might move on without him, Sammo roared back. His role in Ip Man 2 as Master Hung Chun Nam reminded audiences of everything they'd loved about him. The gravitas, the humor, the movement, slower now, yes, but still precise. Still captivating. The duel between his character and Donnie Yen's Ip Man wasn't just a clash of fists. It was a symbolic passing of the torch. The scene resonated with both nostalgia and power. Sammo wasn't done. Not yet. In the years that followed, he continued to appear in films, though less frequently. He took on roles that suited his age and physical condition, often portraying wise mentors, aging masters, or retired fighters. He also dabbled in directing again, though with more caution, aware of the financial risks and changing market. His days of flying through windows and diving off rooftops were over, but his presence, his unmistakable voice, his expressions, his aura, still commanded respect. Through it all, Sammo never stopped being a pioneer. He was the first to show that a large man could be an action hero. The first to choreograph fights like ballet. The first to blend comedy with combat without losing either. He took risks when others played it safe. He fought for his vision even when it cost him. And in doing so, he left a mark that time and trends couldn't erase. But behind the triumphs, the legacy, and the second acts was a truth Sammo himself acknowledged. The journey had been brutal. He had given everything to cinema. And though it gave back fame and fortune, it had also taken his health, his youth, and parts of his personal life he could never reclaim. In a way, the fight scenes were a metaphor, beautiful, thrilling, but always painful. Because for Sammo Hung, every move was real, every fall was earned, and every comeback was personal. Time, as it always does, caught up with even the greatest fighters. For Sammo Hung, the battles he had once choreographed with such grace and intensity were now echoing in his bones. Years of landing on hard concrete, flipping off rooftops, and throwing his body into walls for the sake of a perfect take had taken a brutal toll. In his later years, Sammo underwent knee surgery, a stark reminder that no one escapes the price of physical endurance. The man who had once flown through the air with deceptive ease now walked with caution. His movements were slower, more deliberate, but his mind remained as sharp as ever. He began speaking more openly about his health issues, including diabetes, and the need to finally listen to a body that had served him relentlessly for decades. But Sammo wasn't one to drown in self-pity. If anything, aging gave him perspective. He'd spent so long immersed in the world of cinema that he'd missed parts of real life. Time with family, moments of calm, even basic self-care. In interviews, he admitted to regrets. Not the kind tied to career missteps, but the deeper kind. The time lost with his children, the nights he spent editing or planning fight scenes instead of being present at home. His first marriage had fallen apart under the weight of ambition. Success, it seemed, had come with a tax. And yet Sammo wasn't done teaching, not on film sets and not in life. His role evolved from action star to elder statesman. Young actors now came to him for guidance. Producers sought his name for credibility and audiences. Those who had grown up watching him now brought their own children to see the masterwork. He wasn't interested in playing the clown or the relic. If he took a role, it was because it said something, because it still gave him a chance to move the needle. He began mentoring behind the scenes again, quietly shaping the future of action cinema without demanding the spotlight. His legacy is a paradox, simultaneously underappreciated and irreplaceable. While Jackie Chan became a global icon and gently dazzled in big-budget epics, Sammo was the engine behind much of their success, crafting fight sequences, setting the tone for Hong Kong action films, and challenging the limits of what martial arts cinema could be. He was never the prettiest face on screen, but his hands told stories. His feet, even under the weight of his frame, moved with impossible speed. And his eye for storytelling, especially the marriage between movement and emotion, was unmatched. What set Sammo apart isn't just his physicality, but his courage. He redefined what a hero could look like. In an industry obsessed with aesthetics, he refused to shrink himself to fit a mold. He stood tall and wide and proved that grace and agility weren't limited to one body type. That discipline and excellence had nothing to do with vanity. That an action hero could come in any form, as long as the heart was in the right place. There's also a quiet tragedy to his story, a sense that he never quite got the global recognition he deserved. While his peers graced red carpets and Hollywood billboards, Sammo often remained behind the curtain. Those who knew martial arts cinema understood his greatness, but the wider world never fully caught on. Maybe it was timing, maybe it was image, maybe it was his refusal to play the game by Hollywood's rules. But even without the global fame, his fingerprints are everywhere. On the genre, on the stars, on the very way fight scenes are filmed today. In his personal reflections, Sammo has acknowledged the sacrifices he made, the years of tunnel vision, the moments with his children he can't get back. He once said in an interview that if he could do it over again, he would still choose film, but maybe with more balance. It's a sobering truth for anyone chasing greatness. Even legends carry wounds that don't show on screen. Yet Sammo Hung remains more than a cautionary tale. He's a testament to the kind of artistry that doesn't fade with age. When he appears now, gray-haired and slower moving, the audience still leans in, because they remember, and because even now, when he raises his hand, there's still weight behind it. Not just physical force, but history, legacy, and soul. He once said that martial arts is about control of body, mind, and spirit. In that way, Sammo has always been a master. Not just in the fights he choreographed, but in the life he lived. He controlled the story when others tried to write him off. He kept going when the spotlight shifted. And in doing so, he carved out a path that others still follow. As he steps back from center stage, Sammo leaves behind a generation of action stars who owe him everything. He was the architect, the innovator, the first to show that Kung Fu could be art, comedy, drama, and philosophy all rolled into one. He never needed to be the loudest. He just needed to be undeniable. And he was. In the end, Sammo Hung's story is not just one of fame or fight scenes. It's about resilience, about carving your own space in a world that tells you you don't belong. It's about refusing to shrink, refusing to quit, and refusing to be anything but extraordinary. He didn't just enter the dragon, he built the whole damn arena. He wasn't the flashiest, he wasn't the prettiest. But Sammo Hung was the one everyone else learned from. His fight scenes may be legendary, but it's his heart, his pain, and his refusal to disappear that turned him into something more. A symbol of grit in an industry that forgets fast. The spotlight may have shifted, but the shadow he cast still looms over every kick and punch you see today. If this story moved you, hit that subscribe button. Criminal Tracks is where legends live on and secrets don't stay buried.